Hey everyone, in this video we are going to tackle logical fallacies. And the reason we're going to do this is because these are a fairly common thing that you will encounter in your everyday life. But as you're working on your persuasive paper, you want to think about how you can incorporate one of these so you can defeat it more effectively. So in this video, we are going to talk about what a logical fallacy is, so that way you can identify them and defeat them in the wild as you're encountering them for this particular essay. This will also be helpful as you're moving into English 102 and any future courses where if you deduct, a logical fallacy, it will be an easy thing for you to sort of point out. So what exactly is a logical fallacy? Well, this is any error in reasoning that occurs when a person makes a flawed or deceptive argument that may appear valid but lacks sufficient evidence to support it. So let's break that down because a couple things here are really important. It's any error in reasoning. So logical, we know what logical means. Fallacy is like an error or mistake. So it's basically any logical mistake. So when a person is making a flawed or deceptive, we want to remember this because sometimes you can just be wrong about something. You could be making a bad argument, like just because you don't know very much or you're just making a mistake. That's cool. It happens to the best of us. But logical fallacies can also be deceptive. You can be purposefully trying to, I don't want to say deceive someone, but get them to agree with you, even if you don't necessarily have the evidence to support your position. And so when you're making an argument, this is a fairly no sort of thing to do because it's not a very ethical way of making an argument. So what are logical fallacies? We're going to go through 6 of them, and I definitely want you to write them down, and I'm going to use an article that I've posted on D2L as an example. So if you want to go ahead and look at Banning Books Protects Your Kids by Rebecca Hagelin, I think is how you say it. That's the one we're going to look at. So the first we have is an ad hominem attack. And this is one that you're probably the most familiar with. This is a Latin word that really just means attacking the person making the argument rather than the argument itself. You might just think about this as name calling. You're literally just calling someone a name, like some perverted author most people have never heard of, which Rebecca Hagelin says. Or maybe you want to call someone a loser author. Or maybe you call people who are teachers and librarians educational elites. But it's ways of attacking the person to belittle them, make them seem less trustworthy, make them seem less credible. But it's just attacking that person rather than actually thinking about their argument. The other one is one that I think is a bit more common, and I don't necessarily have an example from the Hagelin article, but this one is called a straw man. And this is when you distort or misrepresent an opponent's argument. So they're trying to argue one thing, but you sort of twist it into something else so it's easier for you to argue about. That the books children are reading are all garbage and trash. Actually, maybe there's an example of a straw man. And focusing on this is the more common one, focusing on the weakest part of another person's argument. But basically, think about this. If you ever got in a fight with a scarecrow, you probably win because straw is really weak, it's really fragile, it's easy to beat up. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to turn your opponent into straw, so that way it's easier for you to beat them. So you distort what they're saying, you misrepresent what they're saying, or you find their weakest spot, and that's what you attack. That's what a straw man is. One of the more common ones, and you see this a lot in the Hagelin article, is an emotional appeal. And this is when you use emotions, excitement, fear, excitement, anger, happiness, etc., 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 to manipulate your audience into agreeing. Now, it is not necessarily a rhetorical appeal to make your audience feel things. You want to, in your writing, you want to usually create an emotional reaction. Unless you're doing a research paper, in which case, I don't know, research's not really that emotional, I guess. I mean, it can be. But anyway, what you don't want to do is you don't want to manipulate people into agreeing with you. And there are ways that you can do this, and you'll see it here. With this example, Mom and Susie arrive home, and while Mom begins cooking dinner, the conscientious and responsible Susie heads to her room and begins to consume, here it comes, what turns out to be highly sexualized, vulgar garbage, filled with 4-letter words and enough verbal porn to embarrass even an old salt. That's a sailor. Mom doesn't have a clue that her daughter's innocence has just been molested in the privacy of her own bedroom. So this little girl, Susie here, is reading a book. And this is how we describe it? This is how we describe the action of reading? You can see the emotional language that this person is using, this author is using, in order to simulate outrage, anger, calling this book highly sexualized, vulgar garbage, 4-letter words, verbal porn, embarrassing to an old sart. It's molesting her daughter's innocence. It's using emotions to manipulate you into agreeing with her position. This girl is literally just reading a book. This is how you're talking about it. Okay, wild. You also have slippery slopes. And this is claiming that a minor event will cause a chain of negative events without any supporting evidence. One that I always like to use is like the gay marriage example. When I was a little kid, people always used to say, if you legalize gay marriage, people will want to marry their dogs. Well, that's absolutely not true. No one's been advocating for marrying their dogs. We've had, gay marriage for what? Over a decade now almost? Yeah, I think. And we're all good. We're all fine. We're all great. Everything's great. Here's another one. We have Mom and Susie at the library. Go look at this example. Mom takes Susie to the library. Susie gets a book from the library, and what happens to her? Her innocence gets molested. What? Like, that's a slippery slope. If your kids read books, their brains are going to be corrupted and destroyed. Okay, I'm not totally sure how we get all the way there. Read a lot of books. I think my brain is mostly in working order, but this is the slippery slope Rebecca Hagelin is presenting. Similarly, you might call that an overgeneralization, where you're making a broad, sweeping statement about something with very limited data or evidence. So like here, she's been talking this entire time about how books are destroying children's minds. And she was talking about one book in particular that like she just found to be so heinous. It was so sexual. It was sexualizing children. It had gay encounters. It was just, the most book. But here's what she says about that. In the interest of decency, there's no way I can give you a word-for-word example. I can give you word-for-word examples. And I refuse to give the trashy book and its loser author free publicity in a column that often gets forwarded around the World Wide Web. So she's overgeneralizing. She's making this big, broad, sweeping statements about these books being pornography, these books being trash, these books being garbage, the author being a loser. We don't know what book she's talking about. We don't know who the author is. She's never given us any passages from the book. She's never said anything. She's basically like, here are some big claims. Trust me. And then she has a great backdoor brag about how like her column gets forwarded around the whole internet. Well, it's like, good for you. But this is an overgeneralization. She has no evidence to support the things she's saying. She's making these big, broad claims, but she's giving you no evidence that you could use to make that judgment for yourself. And finally, there's a false dilemma. And this is where you're presenting a limited number of choices to a problem to tilt the scales toward the desired outcome that you want. It's often framed as an either or. We either do this or we either do that. We either ban the book or we don't ban the book. This often ignores a lot of the gray, where you might say something like, hey, maybe we shouldn't teach the book to, 8th graders, but it's fine in high school. Or maybe we should teach the book, in classrooms and not in the libraries because students, need an adult to help them through the material so they can understand it more effectively. Or maybe it's something like that. But like, you don't just have to do a strict like ban the book or don't ban the book. You can find more nuanced ways of thinking about these really complicated issues that maybe make more people happy, maybe make fewer people happy. I don't know. It's not your job to make everyone happy. But basically what you want to do is when someone presents you with an either or, because dilemma literally just means two, the die in dilemma means two, a choice between two. Ask yourself, are there more choices than what I'm being offered here? Are they deliberately restricting the choices so I'm more likely to pick the one that they probably want? Because you usually frame it as, one is slightly better than the other. That's what makes it a logical fallacy. But anyway, these are the logical fallacies. I'd be happy to go over more of them if any of these are confusing to you, but think about as you're reading these articles, do any of these apply to what the parents are saying, to what experts are saying, to what the author is saying, what anybody is sort of saying? Do you see these logical fallacies at work as people are trying to advocate that we should or should not ban your book? Hopefully this helps. If you have any more questions, definitely let me know.